we were just kind of winding down on the Yadons, but what I wanted to do was, we had questioned Gracie of some of her favorite memories of her family, and I think I'd like to have Jewel and Bud, and Ruby, Alan, if you could, from Hack's perspective. No good, no good, sorry. And then, while we talk about Uncle Paul, since Lauren's here, I'd love to hear just something short about his perspective of Paul and Dorothy, his family, and their interactions. Jewel, it's yours.
It's mine.
Yeah. Now this is just to focus on just a memory of Grandma and Grandpa and the Yadon family overall. This isn't a lot of detail.
I want, my favorite memory of Uncle Emmett was that he rolled up his own cigarettes and he smoked Prince Albert. And I love the smell of some Prince Albert. There were lots of things but the kind of people they were, that they were independent, they were independent and thinkers, I guess that's what I'm thinking. And you didn't have to agree, but you had to appreciate each other, love each other. But you did not, it wasn't a criteria, because we all knew we were right. I knew I was right, regardless of what your opinion was. And it was okay for you to be wrong. I liked you anyway.
Yeah.
And so I think that was a great heritage. Shut that door, didn't it?
Still prevails.
Yeah, yeah. It's like heart trouble runs in the family.
Okay, Bud?
What are we talking about?
Just one of your favorite memories of Grandma and Grandpa and the family.
I think as far as Grandma and Grandpa were concerned, Grandpa was always, to me, a very cheerful and upbeat kind of person. I remember as a little kid, of course they lived down in the canyon, we would go down to visit, and sometimes, I remember one time we got there in the middle of the night, and I don't know that they were really expecting us, but of course, people pulling in down at the canyon were so rare.
Yeah.
And when Grandpa saw the car lights, he got up and he came to the door in his long handles, and he seen us, and he yelled at the top voice, "Looky here, looky here, looky here." Does that sound like him? And he's always just so happy. And they had a rough time, but of course I remember we lived down there one winter and got snowed in and played checkers and ate pecans.
Yeah.
by the gas lamp, And one time I did ask him, because Grandma, if you stayed down there in the middle of the night, you'd hear her praying, just And so I asked Grandpa, I said, "Well, Grandpa, what do you do? Can you sleep when she's doing that?" He says, "Oh," he says, "she'll get to praying and kicking the covers." He says, it'll wake me up. He says, I just join her. You know, their life was very, very simple.
Yeah. Group?
Well, I was a teenager at that time and a little bit younger, but Grandpa called one morning and says, he called me Ruby darling, could you come down, you adults will come down and help me wallpaper the house. We're gonna wallpaper our house. And so we went down, it was on a Saturday morning, and he had these big rolls of wallpaper. It was just a big, colorful, you know, pattern, big pattern. So we got in there. They didn't have to match. Don't worry about it matching. We just want it up. So he slathered on the stuff, the paste, and we hung paper. And then while we were got that done, he went and got some, it was kind of a purple colored paint, and painted all the woodwork in there. And I think I didn't want him to touch that oak table with that purple paint or that grandma's little buffet. And I'm telling you, we got that sucker knocked out by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That whole thing was papered, painted. We sat down, killed the chicken, and had dinner. And by 2 o'clock, we had it wrapped up. It just, he didn't put, there was no,
Pretense?
no, it's just get it done, and it looks nice, and it was fresh and clean, and the spring had sprung in the Yadon house. You know,
That's where my dad
and
got that from.
that's where your dad got it from, like building, yeah. And how can I talk about this? Why, sure, we could knock that wall out. Don't worry about that. It only takes a couple of days to get that done. And so anyway, I loved him so much. He'd stand underneath a clock there on Main Street. That big old clock was still there. And that bank right there in the corner. And he'd stand under that on Saturdays. And I remember going there and he would give me some money for candy or something. And he bought me a little dress at the auction, I remember. A little suit that he bought me. And Grandma Yadon, I loved her. She was just a beautiful free spirit. She was not inhibited by too much. And I love that spirit, and I think it's been passed down pretty much. You can see it in Aunt Grace.
Say, I didn't run the family, did it? And
She
these two are looking at each other.
She wasn't locked in by much, by many inhibitions, and she was cute. I remember she walked out car one day and Grandpa was walking behind her and he said, isn't she the cutest little thing? I says, yeah, she just like my grandma to me. I don't really see her as cute, but I guess she was. But she was cute, and they had a real uncomplicated love. It really was. It was hard. She knew a lot of sorrow. She lost her some children, and Gracie was the light of her life. She talked about Gracie most of the time when she was in my house. She taught me a lot of the basic chords on the piano, and then I started playing the organ and piano after that. So I loved her spirit. She taught me how to pray. Her conversation in prayer was interesting. If you want to know the latest, you got close to her because she's going to talk to the Lord about it, and you can figure the rest out. You know, it was about someone, but she definitely had a deep love for life. They lived every day in a good way. Yeah. And I remember some hard times. We were down there and they were talking about paying their taxes, and Grandpa was working for Mr. Olmsted on, you know, up above when he did that. And how the Lord provided for him. It just was a miracle. But and I love because Grandma wasn't afraid to use a few little bad words once in a while to make her point. Maybe somebody did you tell about the dress? Or tell them about that. That was fun. It's humorous. Our grandkids love that. That's mild to them.
Well, no, she wanted a new dress.
Yeah.
So we went shopping, she was praying, oh Lord, just help me to find the right dress. And she tried one on, didn't fit, and she said, oh.
Well, no, she had it on. She had it on, and she was just praising the Lord because this is going to be the dress. But she was kind of hippie, and she couldn't get it clear on. And she said, "Oh shit, get this dress off of me!" Yeah, she was just hilarious that way. It was
It's been passed on.
Passed on. She was just a very, like I said, a very free spirit, and Grandpa was too, and very opinionated.
No condemnation.
No,
Her hair started getting gray, and so she went down to the dime store. She wanted to color her hair. And she's looking at the dyes there, and one was for cotton and one was for wool.
I've heard that
Oh.
one.
And she said she stood there wondering if her hair was cotton or wool. So she decided to get the wool, took it home and dyed her hair. What was it, wasn't it a pink or came out of a blue or?
it was funny.
She won some moisturizing cream for her face too, and she found this little jar, brought it home, and it was Mom deodorant.
Oh.
Oh, that stuff doesn't feel good, you know.
Smells good.
On Saturdays, she would go to the,
Woolsworth.
yeah, and I
Woolsworth.
worked in there, and, I would make her a milkshake or something, and I started working at King's. And Grandpa Yadon came there, I was, in charge of all the candy, it was that bulk candy, you know, you weighed it out by the pound. He'd come in there, and nobody was watching, I just loaded that man with candy, he just pockets in his, didn't have very many teeth anyway, you know, and he was just smiling, and, oh, that was just a fun time in my life, I really loved those people.
She loved her pillbox hat.
Mhm.
And when she was living up there with Dad, and Steve was home at the time, he was a baby that was, and Grandma came to church with her pillbox hat on, and it was just as white as snow. And Dad says, "Mama, did you get a new hat?" Well, she kind of giggled a little bit. She kind of acted kind of. Steve walked up and says, "No, she didn't get a new hat." He went up, he went whop on the top of her head, and the powder just flew. She had taken body powder and just covered that hat and whitened that baby right up.
She was inventive. No.
She's the only person I know who could play a song in one key and sing it in another.
She could do that.
She was visiting us when we were in McClary. And the lady across the street, Mrs. Lake, they had a little old white dog. And so Grandma and her become friends, you know. And so Grandma was over there and she was telling Mrs. Lake about a little dog that they had. And Easter was coming. And so lo and behold, Grandma and Mrs. Lake took dye and, was it blue?
Blue dye and dyed that dog.
Blue dye and dyed that dog's hair blue. It was a funny looking dog.
You know, she had that little apartment there just half a block from Dad. She said to my dad one day, she said, "Paul," she said, "I had a ring of bologna laying on the table." Said, "I just brought it back from the store." Said I looked up and that ring of bologna's gone. Said, "Did you take it?" Dad says, "No, I haven't been in your place." Well, she had a habit of leaving her back door open. And so she was sitting there at the kitchen table at Dad's, and they were talking about where in the world did that ring of bologna go. About that time, Raymond had this little old dog, and the dog was laying down on the floor beside the table and was belching and passing gas, and belching and passing gas. And Dad says, "Mama, I think I know where that ring of bologna went." And sure enough, that dog had gone through that door, got up on her table and took her ring of bologna.
First time I heard that one, that's good.
Well, you remember old Topsy?
Yes.
Grandma was trying to make bread, you probably remember this. Trying to make bread and she's trying to get this doe to raise, and she couldn't get it to raise, couldn't get it to raise.
Topsy was a great name.
Yeah, Topsy was a great name, and go ahead and tell the story. But she couldn't get this doe to raise, and so finally she got irritated with it, and she threw it out the back door, you know, and made some new dough to make her bread. After a while, old Topsy was out there and her belly was big, you know. She'd eaten that dough and it got warm and started raising. Grandpa had to go out and stick a knife in her to relieve the gas.
Oh,
And
mercy.
they didn't waste anything because they kept the chickens, and this was common though. It wasn't like they were just the way people did. They just threw everything, the peelings and everything out the back door. And the chickens all came and ate it and whatever else, you know, so that was, now the sanitation department would have this in jail.
Oh, yeah.
But then it seemed like the right thing to do.
Always loved the contest that would go on between my dad and Grandpa. Because every time we'd go down the canyon, first thing Dad would say says, Dad, any fish in the creek? Yeah, there ain't a thing, not a thing. Said there's no fish in the creek. Said nothing biting. And they'd talk back and forth, and Grandpa would just tell him how there wasn't anything. And Dad would always love to get his fishing pole and go out there. And Grandma, she'd be going over there heating up her frying pan. Pretty soon here Dad would come in with a couple of fish or 2 or 3 fish. And Grandpa, he'd laugh. He'd think that's so funny because he knew that if he told Paul there wasn't any fish in the creek, that would be enough to get him out there to fry some up for breakfast.
Your dad got a 4-pound trout laid clear across the water.
Hey, you remember the old cave across the creek,
Yeah.
up on the side of the canyon? We used to go up there and play in that cave.
Wonder didn't cave in on us.
Yeah,
We found a saber-toothed tiger's teeth
yeah.
in there, jawbone.
It was just a cave that, I don't know who did, I guess Frank or some of them must have dug it when,
Hot Skyler, yeah. But that other cave down the road, it had such fine, so fine on the bottom. Found out that's where the Indians made fire in there and made their arrowheads.
yeah.
We found flint and arrowheads all over right there. I'll tell you one time when one of Dad's workhorses got sick and got down. And, you know, his living depended on his horses and getting that gravel out of the creek. So Mom went up there and she got a bucket of water. She threw in there, get up out of there in Jesus' name. That old horse got up and took off down the canyon. And Dad could finish working.
My goodness,
Well.
isn't that amazing?
I was playing in the front yard one day, a bunch of us. We'd just come up from the canyon. I had just been with Grandpa. And I don't know, somebody did something to me and I said, what the Sam Hill? And my dad come out of he had the screen door, he come out of there. He said, what did you say? And I said, what the Sam Hill? He said, where did you learn to talk like that? Who told you to talk like that? I said, Grandpa. He got right in my face. He said, now look, there's some things that Grandpa and Grandma sometimes say once in a while, but I don't ever want you to ever say it. You understand? He says, now Grandpa came out of the farm in Missouri and he learned some things that sometimes slip out of his mouth. Boy, don't you ever say that again. I said, okay. So I learned that sometimes Grandpa wasn't the best influence.
I wonder if he was going to heaven, you know.
We had an incident like that, but with my mother.
Yeah.
We just got down there from El Paso. We just moved back to Idaho, and the there and got there late at night. We were all sitting around just reacquainting ourselves with Grandpa and Grandma, and a little mouse came scooting across the floor, and they have mice there all the time, I guess. And Grandpa grabbed the broom, that little son of a gun, that little son of a gun, that little son of a gun, just like he did, real powerful. And my mother went into, you know, my mother was the most proper woman
Yes,
in the whole wide world. She just went and she said, I never want to hear you kids ever say that. She just about passed out. I said, oh, I just thought it was hilarious. I wanted to say that so bad.
We were standing out there one day out looking up at the moon. Grandpa told me, I can still recall this, he said, boy, that moon's made out of green cheese. Really? Yeah. He, you know, I believed that for the longest time.
Yeah.
And, you know, if he said it, I believed it. I mean, who was I to doubt it, you know? And he loved to drive fast. Getting that old Buick Roadmaster, whatever that old thing was. He goes speeding down there. He said, boys, let's see how close we can come to these fence posts. Man, he goes sliding around there. Grandpa, we'd scream. And man, he'd slide in that gravel, and oh, he thought that was so much fun. We thought he was the coolest guy in the world, man. And,
One time, years ago, Grandpa wanted to know two things about a man: his politics and his religion. Grandpa was a Democrat through and through.
Truman Democrat.
Yeah. And Dewey was running on the Democratic ticket. And Wilkie was running on the Republican ticket. Well, I got a sign that said, vote for Wilkie.
Oh dear.
And I put it on the bumper of Grandpa's car.
Ooh.
I remember that.
And he seen that, and he didn't think it was funny. I mean, he got mad. And he said, boy, I'm gonna kick your A. And he came at me, and he kicked me in the hind end. It just felt like my tailbone come right up through my shoulders. I done it as a joke, you know. But man, it wasn't a joke.
No.
How old was she?
Huh?
How old was she?
I was probably 14 or 15.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that.
Weapon.
Huh?
Kicking was the way the boys, you know.
Yeah, one time he
He never
kicked
did
me
kick
up
me.
the stairs at the house, there at home. I said to him, I said, Grandpa, you old coot, how you doing? Wrong.
Wrong thing to say.
He was doing quite well.
Yeah.
I never would let him kick me though.
Alan, we haven't heard from you. What's
Yeah,
story?
that part of the family, the only great grandma I do remember, she was in our house one time, and I always thought, Gracie reminds me of great grandma.
Yeah.
Just her features, always have. The only thing I remember of the canyon is years later when we came back from Latin America, Dad took that little church there, and I got a scholarship for College of Southern Idaho on the track team. And they would take us out there once a week, out to the canyon, to practice, and we'd start at one end of the rim and run down, around, and all the way back up, and we'd do that 10, 15 times. And honestly, I got to hate that ride out there, because, man, they just beat us up on that rim.
I've never heard that story.
Yeah, I've run that canyon probably 600 times in that 2 years, year and a half that I was there. And the guys on the track team, it was a lot of fun. Grandpa and Grandma, three things that stand out to me. I remember Grandpa, he bought his first car with power brakes in it, and when they were living in St. Louis. This is kind of in the same time, and I remember he was all excited. He'd come pulling in the house there, and we were staying with him at that time. I think it was right before we were going down to Chile or sometime in that season. But anyway, he pulled in, and of course he had to get us all in the car. I mean, it was a big land yacht, one of the big old. And I remember sitting in the front seat, and he drove us down to a little ice cream shop, got us all ice cream, so Mom and Dad, and I forget who was on. I remember sitting in the front seat of the car, that ice cream, and of course no power brakes, no, not power brakes, but no seat belts in that day.
Yeah.
And he did not have the quite feel on those things yet. We came to a stop sign, I don't remember a stop sign, or it was a red light or something. And man, he hit those things, and I mean, I went flying clear up on the dashboard of that car, and my ice cream cone hit the window, and this is hot summertime, and melted all the way down and went right down into the heat vents of the car.
Oh, wow.
So I remember weeks after that, that car just stunk, had a horrible, sour smell, brand new car. And he was getting adjusted to his power brakes. Another time when we lived there, my dad got this wild hair idea to go buy clippers instead of going to the barber shop and paying $2, you know, whatever it was at the time. He was going to save money. He went to the store and bought clippers, and it was down in the basement of Grandpa and Grandma's house. And so Dad kind of started going at it, and Grandpa came down and goes, no, you're doing it wrong. So he took the clippers and started clipping away, and about 5 minutes later, Grandma comes walking down. Now, I've cut all the boys' hair. You don't know what you're doing. I mean, by the time I got done, they had to totally shave my head. It was nicked up. It was just everything. It was a mess. But then years later, this was actually when we came back, and Dad took the little church there in Twin after I graduated from school. Well, yeah. What was that same time when I was on the track team there? I was 8 weeks of getting married. We had our engagement, announcements were sent out. I mean, the cake was ordered, it was all done. And I knew all along it wasn't the right thing. You know, and I was just wrestling with this thing, you know, and at that point I'm going, there's no way I can back out now, you know? I'm gonna look like a jerk, and, you know, and the people in the church, you know, and I'm just let everybody down. I can't, no way. But I wrestled with this and wrestling with it. And so Sunday night after church, and I was in bed, it was at 2 in the morning, and Dad came in the room and woke me up and said, your grandfather's on the phone. And I'm thinking, you know, 2 in the morning, my grandpa's never called me 2 in the morning, whatever. And so he gave me the phone, and sure enough, he just says, you know, Grandma and I, we've been laying in bed, and we can't go to sleep, and we're just tossing and turning, and we're wrestling, we're praying for you. Not sure what you're dealing with or what you're going through, but we just, you know, we just want you to know. I mean, that's all that I needed to hear. I mean, when Grandpa spoke, it was like, it was God to me, you know. And that was a real turning point in my life. It saved me from really making, I think, a terrible mistake in my life. And so the next Sunday after church, she was in the car, and I pulled up in the driveway, and I said, it's over, give me the ring, you know, kind of thing. And, you know, how come? Well, my grandfather called me. No, I was just kidding. But we went to the but looking back at it, it was totally a God thing, you know, that God just spoke to Grandpa and Grandma. And during that same season, then Sharon and I, years ago, when we left Ohio, we came here. We were here for about 1.5 years before we went to Washington. And I remember one day, Grandpa wanted to go on, had a day off or whatever. We'd always go to their house, and he wanted to go on a horse ride. So him, I, and Mindy got in the car. We thought we were going just up the road here, but we ended up driving clear to eastern Idaho that day. I mean, it was like 5 hours, finally got to this place. And Grandpa got on the horse, and we rode for about 2 hours up to the mountains and all the way. He gave us a horse ride, you know, and it took us like 3 hours to drive all the way back. And that was a cool day. It was a fun day for me. And always going to their house. And Sharon and I, after church on Sundays, would go there because you could instantly fall asleep.
Yes.
95 degrees, and you just go on that couch and just melt. It's just really restful.
Very peaceful.
I always remember Grandma, her little laugh, you know, I always loved to get her laughing. She'd sit in a chair and just shake. Yeah, just great people. Great influences in our lives. Yeah.
Tell us about your family's missionary experience. Where they went, where you went to school and all that stuff.
Well, yeah, listening to Gracie today, those memories came back, just that whole generation, their generation that would just launch out and go to places like Alaska, and land in Chile, you know, and not know anybody, not know the language back in the day. And, you know, I think about it today and I go, man, that was just, how did it happen? How, you know, not knowing people, and, you know, you're going to start a church and you can't even speak the language, but, you know, as I grew a little older, I always questioned, you know, God, why'd you call my mom and dad? You know, definitely didn't speak to my heart at that point, but I look back and it's great. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today if it wasn't for that time in my life. But, you know, my dad was definitely a hard worker. He, you know, like you said, Ruby, just, I never know my dad to never really finish something. You know, it's like, just get it up, get it done. And man, we'd always, but anyway, in Latin America, we experienced a lot of that. I remember one time my dad and I helped him build a baptism tank, and we'd never done cement. You don't have cement mixers, and we're mixing this thing up in the front of the church, and we had a few guys helping us and had this frame thing and put the gravel in it and got it all set up. And a couple days later, went back and pulled the forms off and put the hose in it. I remember we went to lunch, we came back, and man, half the church was underwater. I mean, water was just shooting out the side of that baptistry. We used too thick of gravel, you know, and it didn't. And so, but over the years, I was able to experience a lot, see a lot.
Do you have a problem? Keys? Oh, no, I'm sorry, I don't. Moses, what, is there a problem?
Maybe took off with his keys, is that what I'm hearing?
Oh, she's got his keys. Okay.
I think I'll just end up on this. One of the cool stories I remember from my dad. I mean, we first arrived in Chile, and of course, learning the language. As kids, we picked it up really quick, especially just kids out on the street. We'd be playing, and then they'd point at something, say it, and they'd want us to teach them English. And, you know, however, we did learn quickly, though, when we got to church, and there's certain words we said. You know, people at church would correct us because the kids on the street were teaching us another whole dialect.
Where did Moses go? Excuse me.
What's that?
Where'd you go?
He's just walking in, he walked in the other room.
Well, he's here, so find him. Bye.
So,
She's looking for
my dad planned this trip, a 3-week trip down the southern tip of Latin America, all the way down to the Magellan Straits, all the way. And we got down to where they call a city called Puerto Montt, and as far as the highway would go, or the road would go, from there you gotta get on a boat or ship and go on down. And we got mixed up between berth and bath, and he thought we were getting a room that didn't have a bath, more of a public bath on it. But really, we weren't getting a berth. We ended up down in the hole of the ship where all the Indians were for 3 days.
Oh.
And that was just an incredible experience in my life. And watching my dad being a part of that. I'm not going into the details, but man, that was bad. It was bad. Anyway, we took that trip, went all the way down to the southern tip of Latin America, came home. I think my dad was in bed for about 2.5, 3 weeks, lost so much weight. We were both just sick. But just incredible, memorable things. And in fact, just in the last 2 months, you know, through the technology today, I've had more people get in contact with me through Facebook, kids that were in our church down there when I was a kid, just popping up, you know, just remembering, and mom and dad, and So, and the last thing I wanted to say is the year before my dad died, he gave me a letter that had never been opened. And I take that back. It was 3 years before my dad passed away, just before we left Tacoma. A letter that Grandma had given to them, had sent to them, and never been opened, and she was writing it to me. And I opened it up, and it was like, it was the day I was born. And she wrote it to me, "Dear Alan, you know, glad you're in the world, you got great mom and dad," you know, just, and it had never been opened, and I opened it up, you know, just, it
Neat.
was like 3 years ago, and I have that from Grandma wrote. Stamp, everything on it, just, somehow they had put it away, or they ended up finding it again. Cool things.
I got a couple of memories of Uncle Haskell and Aunt Ruth. One was, I remember, of course, I just thought Uncle Haskell was the neatest guy in the world. And one day we were driving in the car with him. And I remember sitting in the passenger seat, he was driving. And he sneezed. And when he sneezed, he said, "Whiskey!" I thought that was the neatest, because Dad would never let us say those kind of things. But I figured you could do it when you're sneezing. And so, boy, from then on, I thought that was cool, because if Uncle Haskell could do it, anybody could do it. And I found myself the other day sneezing and saying whiskey. And my memory of Aunt Ruth was when my sister was dying. Leona was dying, and Mom and Dad were pretty much occupied over at the hospital. And Aunt Ruth and Uncle Haskell took us kids down to Twin Falls to help out. And we stayed there, Sam and I can still recall, it was that parsonage across from the church, and I can still recall it was out the back door. Vern and I got in a fight, which is not unusual at our place. I mean, we were always tangling. And so when he and I went at it, it was no big deal for us. And boy, we were wailing away on each other. And Aunt Ruth came out that back door, and she had this little ruler in her hand. And she says, "You boys, stop it right now." So we stopped. And then she said the most awful, incredible thing I ever heard come out of a human being's mouth. She said, "Lauren, you kiss Vern and make up." I stared at her like, "You have lost your ever-loving mind." He is the last person in the world I would kiss. I would kiss the ugliest girl at school before I'd kiss him. And she stood there waving this, and I was 8, and Vern was 6. And she stood over us. And I looked at that sweaty cheeks of his, and I thought, "Oh dear God, this is." You can't be. She meant it. She meant every word of it.
Oh, been there, done that.
And she stood there waving that little ruler until I kissed him. That was the most awful experience of my life. Those sweaty cheeks.
I kissed Hack more than once.
And then Vern turns around to kiss me, and the sucker bit me. Of course, Aunt Ruth didn't see it. And then, of course, we go at it again. And of course, we had to kiss again. And I just, every time I think, "Oh, please, lady, I don't know where you come up with this idea. But this kissing business, that don't work. That don't work."
Horrible. Horrible.
Oh, boy.
The key to that was that when he went to kiss you, you stick your tongue out. And then kiss your tongue. Hug you.
Yeah, but
Right, he made a big wet block. You know,
oh,
Bud did.
Well, you know, I can understand now, wanting to kiss your brother. But having to kiss your sister, man. That was something else.
I can still remember just shuddering. Oh. In fact, that whole, I don't know how long we stayed with them, but
just a few,
just
just a little bit.
it was just a little bit. Boy, that stood out as the most memorable thing in my mind.
You were fighting here.
Oh, yeah.
They
Hey,
didn't
don't,
fight anymore.
yeah, don't mess with me, man. I don't want to kiss you. I promise I don't want to kiss you. That's a great deterrent for behavior, I'll tell you.
That was one of her weapons.
It really worked.
Let's see, where are we? Lauren, do you want to just share a few minutes about your family and?
Of course, Dad and Mom came to Parma in 1935.
Where did they meet? How did they meet?
They met, well, Dad, Aunt Ruth and Uncle Haskell had been in Oakland at the Bible College, Bible school there in Morris, and they came home. And Uncle Haskell had convinced Dad to go back with him.
Okay.
And he often remembered how he rode in the rumble seat of their old car. And Mom had come down from Salem, Oregon, and she had come down there, and they met there at the Bible school. And after they got married, they moved up to, back up to Idaho, and then Dad, I think he got him, I think Brother Hurd or somebody kind of talked him of going to start a church in Parma. And man, that old house they moved into, the old, what we call the old Bacon house, it just was torn down last year. It's the house that Ordell was born in, and it was a shack from it. It was a shack way back when, and it is. But their life was hard. I guess they didn't think anything of it. Mom, the babies that were born, Raymond and Ronald, were a real trial. I look at our family pictures that we have on record. Every time we had a family picture, there was a child missing. It would start off with the two boys, and then Ordell came into the picture. Then the next picture it'd just be Ordell and Raymond, because Ronald was in the state school. And then it would be Leona, so there'd be three. And then pretty soon there was a little baby in Mom's lap named Marvin. Then pretty soon they only had three again because Marvin was gone. And it just then there was my picture, and then Leona disappeared out of the picture, and it just their life. That's why we could walk away from the old Parma house without a lot of. There's a lot of sorrow there, a lot of sorrow, and but Dad left. He left quite an imprint there. We just, and Mom found it difficult. Mom found it difficult to love. I didn't realize till after she was gone and I was an adult, that she had come from an abusive background. And the abuse of her childhood rendered her unable to really extend love to her children. And so I learned to love and forgive her because she just wasn't able. And but we had a lot of memories. We were we were so poor, we didn't know. I mean, everybody around us was poor. I mean, so we didn't have a complex. We didn't know to feel inferior to anybody till we got to school, you know. And I remember after Leona died, there was her bicycle leaning up against the fence. And Dad told me I could have it if, you know. So I jumped on her bicycle, and I thought, you know. So I was riding her bicycle to school till some kid pointed out it was a girl's bicycle. And then I was too ashamed to, so I put it up and leaned it against a tree in the backyard. So, but you know, we had a lot of wonderful memories. Dad, you know, we just never had a lot of high expectations. We just we had a lot of good folks in the church. We were rural, a bunch of folks, and we had a lot of good memories. And I walked when we laid Raymond to rest. Why, I walked through the cemetery and look at all the names. And Dad used to say that he raised up a congregation of people. He buried a congregation, and he sent a congregation away to the mission field. So I'm very appreciative of the memories, but it was a struggle. It was a struggle till finally Dad's old heart gave way, and he just laid her down, and he didn't linger in a nursing home or anything else. When Dad died, why, Norman and Haskell called me in Louisiana to tell me he was gone. That was such a shock. I will say this about, just to show you the kind of folks. Steve and I, when we all gathered here after Dad's death. We gathered here, and Ordell and Vern were going to take care of some funeral arrangements, and Steve and I were going to go up to his cabin up on the Little Salmon, because that's where he had left his effects. So we go up to the cabin, and up in the loft. Of course, you guys are around the cabin, up in the loft. Dad had this little old cardboard suitcase. That thing was beat. It was beat up when I was a kid. I don't know why he didn't throw it out. And he had a little old suitcase there and his stuff, and his Bible was laying open on his bed, and so I gathered up his things. In the meantime, Steve said, you know, he's got an old friend, a couple of cabins down the road here that we really need to go down and tell old Tom what happened. And I said, well, you do that, and I'll pick up his things. And so I was collecting Dad's things upstairs. And Steve walked down to that cabin, and he told old Tom, he said, I just want you to know that Dad passed away up there. He named the mountain. I can't remember it now, but he said he was bugling elk. And the elk were bugling back at him, and said he just fell over on his face in the weeds, and he's gone. And Tom just shaking his head. Oh man, that was so bad. Oh, I'll miss him. He was just going on and on and on. Steve says, well, Tom, I guess I better go. My brother's up at the cabin. He's gathering Dad's things up. We'll be holding his service. And Tom said, I can't come down for the service. And so Steve started to walk away from the cabin. And Tom says, hey, hold on just a minute. Steve turned around and come back. He said, where'd you say those elk were? He says, be ashamed to waste that good elk hunt.
Yeah.
So he was going to go up there and finish off what Dad started.
Yeah.
I just want to tell you, your mom we had a pretty sweet relationship. We really did. I think I kind of took your sister's place a little bit. And she told me a lot of things in the nursing home when I'd go visit her. And I have a deep love for Aunt Dorothy, and I think Uncle Paul gets a lot of glory too, but your mom has your abilities, your singing abilities, your writing abilities really came from her.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did.
And she had such a gift in her that I think if she would have lived in this generation, she probably would have never married, possibly, and
Yeah.
been a career person.
Yeah,
Somebody probably pretty famous.
yeah,
She had those gifts, and I saw that when I was a little girl. Because I remember she used to write letters, and she'd tell me things, and I knew a lot of stuff that I'd forgotten, fortunately. Probably didn't need to even be part of my thinking, but I just want to tell you, she was a very gifted
She was.
lady.
Yeah.
She was.
And she was, her past, her childhood past was ugly,
yeah,
and she had some real sad things happen to her, and then the loss of her own children.
yeah.
But I want to tell you, right here and now, she was a gifted gal, and when I see you boys stand up there singing, it's not just because of Uncle Paul.
That's
No.
right.
He gets all the glory, really, in all of our hearts, because he was such who he was. That's who he was, but she was such a talented lady, really. She was before her time, that's what I would say about Aunt Dorothy.
Yeah,
In this era, she probably would have been pretty famous. A poet, artist, a book writer, she had all those gifts.
She loved to read, and
She did, and I can see them in all of you boys in a real strong way. I know that the house was not okay, and I know the meals were not okay, and things that really mean a lot to kids were not okay, but the long view of the gifts were fabulous. So, and you, Lauren, are especially blessed with her ability to write and to put on paper and things, and I just want to say that about Aunt Dorothy. She was beyond,
appreciate that, Ruby.
it
Yeah.
was more than any of us can really
Yeah.
remember.
yeah. Yeah, she used to set up things on the dining room table. She'd take scriptures, and then she'd put up props and then she'd take pictures of them and send them to the Northwest News or whatever, and she did. She loved to write. You could always tell when Mom was playing the piano when she hit the wrong key, because of course she played.
Definitely.
Boy, I mean,
Yeah.
those women in those days, they beat that keyboard up.
Yeah.
There was none of this flow and stuff. They were getting after it. And whenever she'd hit a wrong key, she'd start shaking her head. Man, she'd shake her head like that. And you know, if she wouldn't make such a big deal of it, you'd know she'd let you know.
we kind of got a kick out. She had this stack of magazines on one end of the piano bench.
Oh, yeah.
And Steve, to this day, kind of
He does. He does.
sits crooked.
I never even thought about
He does. He sits crooked on the piano bench. Yeah.
Thought about that. Gracie, you made that up.
No, I never.
No, he does. Yeah, he does.
That's the way they learn to play the piano.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your dad was always a very, you know, as much as your folks went through it, your dad was a very positive person. And, we were interviewing a young guy on the district board for a license, and I don't know, it was 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, something like that. And so everybody was asking questions while your dad was sitting there like this. We interviewed that guy and finally got done. The fellow got up and walked out the door. Well, when he clicked the door shut, your dad woke up. He says, "Bless God, he's a good man, I like him." He'd been sleeping all the time. Didn't hear a word.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, their fights were kind of legendary. I remember we were going somewhere in the car with them, and I don't know what the issue was, but Dad and Mom were not agreeing, and so they got kind of peckish, and so it's time to stop to eat. And so Dad says, "All right, it's time to eat." So we pulled in a little place. Says, "All right, Dorothy, you want to eat? Get out and eat?" "Nope." Said, "I'm not eating." She was pouting. So he says, "Raymond, you going to get out?" "Nope." He was going to join Mom in the boycott. So the rest of us got out. Dad shuts door and he says, "Oh, just stay in there. We need some jackasses in this bunch anyway." And he just walked in and said, "Give me a chicken fried steak." I said to him, I said, "Well, Daddy, you and Mama are fighting." "Oh yeah, but it don't amount to much." He just, "I don't let it bother you."
Lord, I love to go to a funeral when you're gonna be speaking. It's so fun to watch the people, I mean, because you just know what stories to target in and stir up old memories and.
Tell me about when Grandpa got news of Paul's death, you were at the house.
Oh, it was so touching. I was just about ready to go to work. I was living with Grandma and Grandpa. And Grandma had fixed breakfast and we were just sitting down and the phone rang and Grandpa pushed the chair, you know, have those roller chairs, and pushed it back, grabbed the phone off the wall and, "Hello," you know, and just like all cheerful and, "Oh no, oh Mom, come here." And I mean, Grandma came running over there and he goes, "Paul just died." He just started sobbing and he put his head on the table and they both just clung to each other and cried, and I was just like, I mean, I never saw Grandpa react like that, but I mean, it just hit him like, it was just, you know, it was his dear brother and he loved him so much. And every Sunday afternoon, Paul and Aunt Dorothy would drive up and come to their house and come to our house. And that's when we were like renting TVs and we weren't supposed to have TVs, you know, so we would have to pick up these big old TVs and haul them into Mom and Dad's bedroom, throw them on the bed and put a blanket on them.
TV, that's my humpback thing.
Well, you know, this is a good forum to thank Sam. When I was in Louisiana, Sam may or may not remember this. We were having a special celebration at the district campground. We had just rebuilt the tabernacle, and it was a big deal. And it was a multi-million-dollar thing, and all the politicians were coming. We were going to have a camp meeting, and it was going to be a big deal. There was probably 10,000 people there. And this was a few weeks or maybe months before, and I was thinking about this celebration, and I was mowing my yard. I can still recall I was mowing my yard and saying, wouldn't it be great if my dad could come down and share this? This is so beyond what his experience is. Wouldn't it be great? And then I got to thinking, there's no way he can come down here. He'd get lost in every airport they'd put him, you know. He couldn't find his way. And I thought, well, what if Uncle Haskell came with him? You know, Uncle Haskell knows his way around, and Dad would be very comfortable if Uncle Haskell would come. So I remember after finishing mowing, I went to the phone and I called Sam. And he was in the travel agency business. And I ran the idea by him. I said, wouldn't that be a great idea if we could get our dads to fly together and come down here and spend a week? And he said he'd work on it. And he called me back, it wasn't too long, and he said, you're not going to believe this. He just got a deal. And if I recall, Sam, it was something like $400 round trip for the two of them. And it wasn't very much. And so Sam arranged the travel, and they came down, the two of them. They went out and bought matching straw hats. Uncle Haskell and my dad had matching, I mean, it was like schoolgirls getting this, you know. They had these matching straw hats. And I had a special trailer set up for them on the campground where they could be right there, and it was a big trailer, and so you could always tell in that big throng of people. I mean, there was the Senator Russell Long was there, the governors were there, all the big celebrities from Louisiana politics were there, and here's Uncle Haskell and Dad, and you get to meet all these people, you know. But in all of that throng, as you look out on that campground, you could always find Uncle Haskell and Dad. Just look for the straw hats. You'd see these 2 straw hats going across there. And we took them down to Cajun country, down to the Evangeline Oak. Dad would quote the poem Evangeline, so we took them to the Evangeline Oak, and we were having a great time. The problem was, as I was driving them around Louisiana, we'd stop somewhere, and Dad would say, "Oh, I'd like to help buy meals or whatever." He says, "But all I got's traveler's checks." And he couldn't cash his traveler's checks. And Uncle Haskell goes, "Oh, Paul, here, I'll get it." So Uncle Haskell, I said, "Oh," so Uncle Haskell and I fuss about who's going to pay, because Dad always had traveler's checks. Finally, we got somewhere, and Uncle Haskell, he says, "I'm tired of these traveler's checks." He says, "Bust them babies out. We're going to cash them. We're going to find a place to cash them." And Dad's going, "That's great. That's great." And so I was saying, I said, "Well, Dad, how are you and Haskell getting along in that trailer?" It was a very nice trailer. He said, "Man," he says, "Haskell's making me take a shower every day." He says, "I haven't been powdered like this since I was a baby." And you know, it was only 3 months later that Dad dropped dead.
Wow.
And when they called me to tell me that Dad had died, the first thing I thought, thank God we were able to bring those 2. And at the graveside, as we asked Uncle Haskell, "Would you like to say something?" He just couldn't hardly get his composure. And he said, "The trip that Paul and I had together."
Yeah.
He says, "I will never forget it." And so, thank you, Sam. You teamed up with me to make it possible for our fathers to spend a very precious time. That
Yeah, I remember Dad talking about that. It was.
In fact, the last conversation I had with my father, I said to him on the phone, I said, "Dad, did you enjoy your trip to Louisiana?" This is about 3 months, 2.5 months afterwards. He says, "Did I?" He says, "I'm still enjoying it." And so I think those 2 boys in their straw hats, matching straw hats, they'll never forget. I can still see their heads bobbing across that throng of people.
That's good.
Good story.
You haven't gone yet?
I'm going to make mine just really short, but one of the things that sticks with me overall is the sharing of stories, just like we're doing here. I remember a lot of the things you're talking about. But I remember most about Grandma and Grandpa. I was going to their house. And it was primarily, it was Emmett and Dad, first of all, because Emmett lived there, we lived there. And then Paul would come to town, and then Gracie and Charlie, but it was still the sharing of their lives. And I believe I remember Grandma's sugar cookies. Is that right? We always had sugar cookies. But it was, of course, I was just a little tight, but it was always just a joyful time, one of fun. I can remember I don't know where we were going, to Oregon someplace, we stopped in Parma. And in my mind's eye, if I'm walking into your house, you had a big old tree off to the right-hand side, and the church was off to the left. And I remember eating watermelon under that big tree. And Dad and Paul sharing stories. So, yeah, I could sit here and tell you all kinds of things, but that's really one of the basis of the family to me, was they took the time and they enjoyed one another's company, totally. And I think a lot of that comes from, you know, Grandma and Grandpa. They were not pretentious people. They called them like they saw them. It was fun. I'm gonna keep mine really short. That's really what I remember most. All right.
Could I read?
Oh, yeah,
Dad,
but
this is something I found in Dad's stuff. He had written it, typed it up himself. It says, about my journey. God gave me the best companion to walk by my side in Sister Ruth Scott Yadon. The work of the Lord was always first. We were without a car, a bank account, and only had a few pots and pans. Our first home was in the back rooms of a storefront mission in Jerome, Idaho. Along with other gospel workers, we shared, worked, and prayed, and had services. After several months, we were left alone to carry on the church. In the spring of 1928, we moved to Twin Falls and attended Bethel Temple, where Brother John Deering was pastor. The influence of this man of God will never be forgotten. Our next move was to the Roseworth tract, south of Castleford. Here we spent the summer working on a ranch in hay and other crops. During our time there, we started a Sunday school in the Roseworth schoolhouse. After contacting all the neighbors except one, old George, the community drunk, we headed back to the house. We decided to turn around and call on George also. We really got more encouragement from George than we did from some of the church people. Sounds normal. In the fall, we went back to Kimberly and worked for Ruth's folks on a farm until harvest. We saved about $100 from our summer work. With that, we bought our first car, an old Hupmobile sedan with side curtains. We cleaned it up, painted the wheels, and fixed the curtains, but we were soon to discover that the spark we put on the car did not do much for the flat crankshaft in the engine. At the encouragement of our former pastor, Brother W.G. Stallings, we started to a conference in Fresno, California. Journeyed to California in our training in Oakland with Brother Harry Morris in his home, and the old 9th Street Mission are another story. After the rich experiences of Oakland, where our first child, Jewel, was born, we returned to Ruth's folks' place in Kimberly. We were asked to take a small church in Buell, about 18 miles away. We had earnestly prayed the Lord would lead us to the right place, for this was our first pastorate. We spent something over a year in Buell, some fine people and good fruits of our ministry. We were called to come and fill in at our home church, Bethel Temple, in Twin Falls. During the time that we pastored Bethel Temple, Brother Andrew Urshan came and held a 4 weeks revival. Many people received the Holy Spirit during this time. Brother B.M. David of Grand Rapids, Michigan, had been asked to take the pastorate of Bethel Temple. At first they said it would be about 6 weeks, but it was 6 months before Brother and Sister David and Overa came to Twin Falls. This is where Elwin Wayne, Bud, was born. Our next move was to Rupert. We enjoyed 4.5 years of ministry. The church bought a big parsonage, which was a home of later pastors. This is where our third child, Ruby Rudson, was born. It was a cold, snowy day when we moved to Yakima. I remember that. We had a car that didn't have a heater. And Dad, you remember, he heated rocks all night and wrapped them in blankets and put them on the floor of the back seat. And then us kids wrapped in blankets, and the heat from the rocks came up and kept us warm. It was a snowy, cold day when we moved to Yakima, Washington. Brother, he says Tabbert, but I think the guy's
Talbert.
name was Talbert,
It was Talbot.
had resigned as pastor of Emmanuel Assembly, and they had asked us to come. We moved into a little house beside the church. Even though it was time of depression, we had great spiritual refreshing. Our son Haskell Dale was born in June of '39. He was the first of our children to be born in a hospital. The Judd family was part of our congregation. Edwin Judd, foreign mission secretary for the UPC, was baptized as a young man in our church. I cannot take time or space to give many details of our experiences and God's provision during those days. The $12 weekly salary was spread thin. Almost everywhere we lived, we got our meat in the fall of deer and elk. We hauled firewood from the mountains. Our youngest daughter, Sharon Rome, was born in Yakima. While pastoring there, I was also superintendent of the old Northwest District of the Pentecostal Church Incorporated. World War II still started while we were there. I had a draft card 38 in our area. Being a preacher with 5 children, Uncle Sam passed me by. You guys remember when
Yes, I do.
Dad had to go before the draft board and we sat out in the car?
I was only 2 or 3 years
Crying.
old, and I remember that whole thing being fun.
We had services at the Front Street Rescue Mission on the street corners and CC camps. The next move was El Paso, Texas. Brother A.O. Moore contacted us about taking a pastor to Gospel Tabernacle on Idalia Street. After some time, the family visited Texas and I became pastor of the church. The Moores lived in a large adobe home, which became our home. And about, 5 years ago, we were going through El Paso, and I told Francis, I said, I'm gonna try to find that old house. And lo and behold, we missed it a couple streets, but within about a half hour, we found the old house.
Is that right?
Still
I
up?
did
Still
the-
there?
I did the same thing a number of years back.
Yeah.
We were playing, BYU was playing a basketball game down in El Paso, and I took Brian and Brett, if I remember it correctly. And we took some time and we found the old place.
Yeah,
No way.
Yeah.
kinda neat. World War II was being fought on both the European and South Pacific fronts. We had the opportunity to minister to many hundreds of servicemen, both in church and in street meetings. Many soldiers were baptized before being sent out to the war zone. Frank Urett ministered to us for 2 weeks. It was a great time in Wordham for our youngest son, Sam, was born there. A lady doctor had a small hospital where babies were born and cared for. Sam weighed 10 pounds and 11 ounces.
The big one.
The Whopper.
Still there.
Big boy.
He's still a big baby. Sam weighed 10 pounds, 11 ounces at birth and looked like a giant among those little Mexican babies.
He really did. I remember
Yeah.
that. You see all these little kids.
After 4 years of ministering in El Paso, we resigned and moved to Lewiston, Idaho. Lewiston was a home missions work, a real challenge with lots of hard work. Lewiston was a nice place to live. We loved the people very, very much. Brother Carl Adams pastored just ahead of us. He was living there when he and Evelyn were married. 2 years later, we received a call from First Pentecostal Church in Twin Falls, Idaho. We moved to Twin Falls in the fall of '47. We were very much at home there. We spent over 7 years at that church. We had a 15-minute Sunday morning broadcast on KLIX for 6 years. Also, we experienced church growth in many outreach programs. I've served as the Northwest District's, as superintendent of the Northwest District of the United Pentecostal Church during most of this time. Concor's Bible College was started in Portland, Oregon in 1953. We moved to Portland in 1954 and became the pastor of the First United Pentecostal Church located on Killingsworth Street. We worked closely with CBC as most faculty and students attended our church. From this church, we also started a church in Oregon City, Vancouver, Washington. Later, a church in Northwest Portland, the neighborhood church, was started. In the fall of 1958, I was asked by the General Board of the United Pentecostal Church if I would fill the unexpired term of Brother George Glass, Home Missions Director. Brother Glass had resigned. We resigned the church in Portland, and as superintendent of the Northwest District in the spring of 1959, moved to St. Louis. Our ministry of home missions was 8.5 years. The first 6 years of Harvest Time broadcast was under our direction. Our last year as home missions director was the first year we had Christmas for Christ. I worked with some very fine men and women in various departments of the church, traveled the fellowship of the brethren in every state of the Union, and privileged not to be forgotten. From St. Louis, we moved back to Portland. Brother Clemens was residing as pastor of the First Church to go as a missionary to Argentina. We were asked to accept the pastor of the church. We had pastored before. We enjoyed good people in Portland and worked with Concord Bible College. Addendum. Brother Yadon again served as district superintendent in Oregon and also president of Concord's Bible College. He had a number of serious heart problems. Sister Yadon was having trouble with her vision. They moved to Caldwell, Idaho to assist their son-in-law, Norman Rush, and pastor of Valley Pentecostal Church. Brother Yadon had many friends in that area. The Yadons moved to Boise and started having services in their home. A small church was established. He assisted his son, E.W. Yadon, as co-pastor of New Life Fellowship in Boise.
Have you got copies of that? I'd like some of those dates
Yeah.
and stuff.
Here's again what
Just
I'm
kind of a rundown.
proposed that we do,
You didn't finish it.
is, in fact, I'll make this